In our previous video, we installed Windows Server 2016 in our machine. In this video, we are going to promote our machine to a domain controller and join a client machine into our domain. So we are going to do this in 4 steps. First of all, we are going to do some post-installation configuration tasks, like changing IP address and all that. So I'm going to turn on my machine. I've already turned on our machine, and we are going to log in as administrator. Some post-installation configurations are something like changing IP address, setting a strong password for administrator, setting time and changing name of the machine and all that. In server manager, we go to local server, and in here we can check for update. We must check for an update and install the last update, which will has the latest fixes for the bugs. We must change the time zone, the IP address, and change the name and make it a kind of name that will make some sense. Like I will use the word DC, which means which can be with an acronym for domain controller. So I'm not going to check for an update. It's not necessary for a study purpose, but you must check for an update in a production environment. We're going to click in this time zone. This window will appear. Then we choose change time zone, and from this drop down box we can change the time zone that we are located in. Like we must use Kabul, and click OK and OK again. If we refresh the server manager, that will appear in here. Changing the name requires reboot, restarting the computer. So I'm going to do that on the end. But changing the IP address or setting an IP address does not require any restart, so I'm going to do this first and changing the name on the last. To do so, we must click in here, this link. This window will appear. We will choose our network adapter, right click and go to properties. In here we will choose IP version 4 and click properties, and we want to manually configure the IP address. We will choose this radio button, and then here we can put our IP address. I want my machine to have this IP address from this range, this host IP, and everything is set. We click OK and close. We close this wizard as well and refresh the server manager to see the latest update in our local machine. Everything is set. I've already put a strong password for administrator. Now we have to change the name. So we click onto that link, then change, and in here we can set the name like domain controller. We can abbreviate it to DC and click OK. It requires restart. The computer will need to reboot. I pause the video and come back when the computer comes on again. The computer is up again. I go full screen and enter the password for administrator in here. The server manager will open automatically. Then when the refresh is done, we can see it in here that it's refreshing the server manager. When it's done, now we can go to local server. This is the setting for this local machine. We set the name, IP address, time zone, and we must definitely check the update in a production environment. Now everything is set. The next step is to add the service that we can use, the service to promote our machine to a domain controller. That service is called Active Directory Domain Services. So we are going to add the server rule, or as we usually refer to, we are going to add this service, and then we can promote our machine to a domain controller. To do so, we must go to dashboard. We can find the link in here, add rules and features to add our service, or we can go to manage and we can in here you can find it. There's another way as well, by going to all servers. Here's our machine name. We right click and we can use add rules and features. This window will appear that will let us to add the service. I recommend you to go through all this information. They are necessary. I explained most of them and we did most of them. I want to skip this page by default. The next time I come to add a rule or a feature, this window will not appear for me. By checking this checkbox, I click next. I want to directly install a service in this machine. There is no remote machine I want to install a service to. So as everything's set, I click next. In here we can choose our machine. Here is the name of our computer, DC. If we have any other machine that we are connected to, all of them will appear here. We will choose the machine that we want to add the service to, and then we click next. We want to add this service, Active Directory domain services. We click this checkbox, and this wizard is saying that whether we want to include the management tools or not. I want the management tools as well. I want to modify, add or remove anything that I want to do with this service. I want to add it and then click next. Here are some features that I told you about. These are not going to do anything with the services. They are not going to give a service, but they are going to facilitate the services that we are going to use. We don't need any of them. For ADDS, we click next. Here's a brief information about ADDS. I recommend you to go through all of these, and if you find any information interesting, search it on Google as well. We click next. Here is a summary of what we did, what we included and we want to install. If any installation is required, we can check this checkbox, and the wizard will reboot our machine automatically if any restart or reboot is required. I know that we don't need any restart for installing the service. We are okay, and I click next. This will take a while. I pause the video and come back when the installation is done. The installation is done. It took about a minute for me to install this service. Now we are going to do the third step, which is promoting our machine into a domain controller. So I go to our machine. In here we just completed successfully the installation. Using this link we can promote our machine to a domain controller. Or if we close this wizard, we can find that link in notification bar as well. In here, promote the server to a domain controller. We click this link. In here we want to add a new forest. We want to name it cardon.com. For example, you can name it whatever you want, or whatever your website is named to. Then we click next. Here are some information about backward compatibility of our operating system, adding DNS and all that. This will add the DNS service. Global catalog, if we want this domain controller to be read-only domain controller or not. This option is great. This is the only domain controller, the first one, so we cannot make it read-only. And here is directory services restore mode, which required when we want to restore the Active Directory. We will take a backup of our directory, and if we want to restore it back to our machines, where this password will be required, we must make sure to put a strong password in here. And then we click next. In here, this alarm is saying that there's no delegation for our DNS server. That's okay. it couldn't find any delegation for our DNS server. That's okay. We click next. Here we can set our NetBIOS domain name. By default it will set this as our domain name with Cardon. We can change it, but this is okay in my case. I click next. Here are directory for some information files like database, log files, and sysvol. That's okay. We click next. We don't have to bring any changes. Here is a brief summary about what we did right now, and we can find the codes in here as well. If we are in a command only environment, we can use these codes to do whatever I did just now using graphical user interface. You can copy this as well or save as, and we are okay. I click next. In here, here is a brief summary. There are 2 alarms. This is about cryptography, about some security of Windows Server 2016. This is okay. Now we can fix it. That will be fixed, and we can fix it later. This alarm is about the delegation for the DNS server. That's also okay. It checked the prerequisites and the check is complete, and we passed successfully. And in here this alarm is saying that this machine will automatically reboot. We are okay with that. To complete the installation, a reboot is required. I click install. All the services will be installed, and our machine will promote it to a domain controller. I pause the video and come back when the installation is done. It took about 7.5 minutes for me to install and reboot the computer. The reboot took a little bit longer, and the computer is up again. We can put the password of administrator. We can see that we are right now in Cardon domain. We are logging to administrator user of the domain Cardon. I'm gonna put the password for that user, and we can log into our machine. We let the server manager to load. The services will appear here: the Active Directory domain service, the DNS, and the storage. Here we can see the Active Directory domain service, DNS, and storage services. This will be installed by default. We can go to local server. Here we can see that we are no longer in our group. We are in a domain called cardon.com. The next step is to join a client machine like a Windows 10 into our domain. This is my Windows 10 machine. I log into administrator, user of this Windows 10 machine. The username, the name for this username is Windows 10, but the username type is administrator. I log in. When the computer is When we are logged into our machine, we can go to start menu. In here we can write this PC. We go to properties of this PC. We can find it in here as well: control panel, system and security, and then system. This window will appear using control panel as well. Then we can change the name of our computer. we are going to give it a name that will make some sense. Like I want to name it client. This requires a restart, a reboot. That will take time. I will come back when the computer is logged in. I will come back when the computer is restarted. It took about a half minute for me to restart the machine. Now we can log in again to administrator. After logging in, we will bring some changes like setting the time zone. I changed the setting to I changed the setting and my machine will set the time zone automatically. I will set an static IP address. To set an static IP address, I open the run and type ncpa.cpl. This will open the network and sharing center for me. I choose my network adapter, right click and properties, and in properties we can click on IP version 4, go to properties. In here we can set manually an IP address by choosing use the following IP address. I will use this IP address for my machine, a subnet mask. We don't have any router, we are doing this virtually in a production environment. We must specify our router IP address in here. Then in here we can specify the IP address of our DNS server. In our case, the Active Directory machine is our DNS server. So I'm going to type the IP address of our domain controller. You can go back in this video and see the IP address of the domain controller. We set 100 for domain controller when I set 120 for our client machine. I click OK and close. We don't need this wizard as well, this window as well. We can close it. Now we can go to start menu and type this PC, and from here we can choose properties. And properties in this window we can choose change settings. In here we can choose change, and in here we can specify we want to be whether we want to be a member of a work group or we want to join a domain. I want to join a domain. We can enter the domain name here. Our domain name is cardon.com. We press enter or we click OK. Both will work just fine. In here we must specify the domain name and the user that we want to log into it. The domain name is Cardon. We must put a backward slash and then the username administrator. We have only this username in our domain controller, which is administrator. We have the credentials, and I put the password in here and press enter or click OK. Both will work just fine. It's welcoming us to the domain. We click OK and a reboot is required. I pause the video and come back when the machine is logged in again. Again, it took less than a minute for me to restart, to reboot this machine. Now the machine is up again and we can see the username Windows 10. We don't want to log in locally. If we put password in here, our password for this username Win10, we will be logged into this machine locally. But we want to log in as the member of this domain. So we choose other user. In here we put cardon.com, cardon / administrator, or we can say administrator @ cardon. Both will work just fine. In here we must put the password for this administrator in Cardon domain and press enter. And now we will be a member of the domain called Cardone.com. We can check whether we are the member of a domain or not by going to Start menu and typing this PC and choosing Properties. In here it's writing the name of this computer is client, and now we are a member of this domain Cardone.com, and full computer name is client.cardone.com.